The reason I thought about this as is because when we analyze comics or when we analyze graphic novels, whether it is from a social or a cultural or a narrative point of view, invariably what happens is students tend to look only at the content. Now, any kind of discussion should always talk about the formal qualities of comic books or graphic novels. Now, comic books became a popular form of mass entertainment in the 19th century, starting with the newspaper strips in the 1890s, that is in America. Now, they contain a number of short features, usually a collection of newspaper clips. Those were reproduced for form of comics books with floppy covers. It was a kind of advertising venue, and studios were set up to create original stories to fill up these comic books. Now, the term comics, when we say comics, that term is viewed very negatively in the sense that initially comic books consisted of a lot of sensational crime and horror stories. Also, educators felt that it created lazy readers. In fact, when we were young, one of the advertisements for Tinkle was when Raju goes to a store with his parents, and they ask the bookstore, they ask the person at the counter for a book for their son, and Raju keeps insisting, "I want a comic," and the parents keep saying, "No, no, no, Raju, no comics," and then they show him a Tinkle. Tinkle has science, it has nature, it has discussions discussions on scientists. It also has stories. So essentially the idea was no comics, because comics created lazy readers who would not read if they were offered pictures. And the third reason why comics, it was seen as, consisting of childish humor, trivial fancy. It's not meant for adults. Therefore, we have this more respectable, in inverted commas, term, graphic novels. Now, many comic scholars, they object to this kind of term. They say that this term, graphic novels, you're talking about something that's a cultural artifact, which has very little to do with novels in the conventional sense. Also, they said, when you're saying lazy readers, comics are creating lazy readers, you don't recognize that a comic has many modes of communication, many kinds of significations at work. And you don't really have to use this term graphic novel. Now, the format of a comic book consists of both word and image. The reader has to exercise both visual as well as verbal interpretive skills. You have the regiments of art. You have perspective, symmetry. You have the regiments of literature. That is grammar. You have plot. You have characters. All of them are becoming superimposed on one another. So comics actually demand a greater analytical power from the reader. So in the most economical state, what do we understand by the term comics? You have repetitive images and you have recognizable symbols. So when they are used again and again, and when they convey ideas, then you have a literary language, a literary form. Now, the question is, what is comic books and graphic novels? What is the difference between a comic book and a graphic novel? Is there a difference? Does it matter? Should we read them differently? Now, there is no precise definition for a graphic novel. It may be defined as a medium. Remember, it is a medium, which is a part of another more encompassing cultural field. Graphic literature, visual story writing, comics, everything together. You can take it as a graphic novel. If you consider that as a medium, if you think of graphic novel as sitting on a spectrum, on one end you have the graphic novel, at the other end you have a comic. Essentially, they are the same. The differences are the features can be the differences can be situated at 4 levels. Now, the reason I'm saying this is so that you understand what a comic book is versus a graphic novel. Now, we will talk about it in terms of form. We will talk about it in terms of content. Then there is a publication format, also production and distribution aspects. Now, I'm only going to talk about the first 3. Now, regarding form, comics and graphic novels both follow the same fundamental structure. You have you have the images that are juxtaposed into a grid, and you have them horizontally placed. All these images are horizontally placed. They're vertically organized images. You have to read it in a sequential order to determine what their name is. So comics are a way of storytelling where you have a sequential decoding of juxtaposed images. Page by page, you have the sequential decoding. That is why sequential art. Now, graphic novels can follow these rules perfectly. For instance, when you have Moss is one of the novels. There you have this similar kind of decoding. But when we come to graphic novels, the fact is that they also explore many of these rules. They try to push the medium beyond these limits. So the graphic novel tries to foreground individual styles, recognizable styles. They don't have to maintain this kind of sequential art. They can break this basic grid structure. They can go back to the classic format, all these kinds of things. So when we describe one of the terms that is used, when we describe a graphic novel, this recognizable style, we have the notion of graphiation, graphiation. Graphiation is graphic expression. It refers to the fact that the hand, the body, the personality of the artist is contained in the visual representation of the object, of the character, of the setting. So there are a wide range of possibilities. You have a highly subjective style where the personal expression of the author takes priority. You can have a decidedly objective style, which is very similar to that of a comic. So when you say graphiation, it is a powerful tool to explain or to explore or examine the varying details or the extent to which you have the visual presence of the author in the work. So graphiation should be used in the serious analysis, any kind of serious analysis of the drawing style of the graphic novel. When you look at a graphic novel, when you analyze a graphic novel, always pay attention to the style of the artist. That is of paramount importance. It is not like a comic where you have this reproduction of images where you can have multiple cartoonists. You have multiple people who are drawing those images. A graphic novel has an author behind it, something like the auteur theory. Secondly, graphic novels can also innovate at the level of narrative. That is, it emphasizes the role of the narrator. The narrator becomes present visually and verbally than in the case of a comic book. In the comic book, the story itself, you're reading some sort of a story. You are not aware of the presence of the narrator. In a graphic novel, there is always the presence of the I, who the I is. So that is the difference in form of the graphic novel. Then we come to content. Now, here, particularly, the graphic novel tries to distinguish itself from the other kinds of comics, where you have the content. Now, content matter in a graphic novel is more adult. Adult does not mean pornographic. It, in the sense that it is serious, it is sophisticated. At least it is uninteresting for a juvenile audience. So graphic novels are more disposed towards realism. Contrary to usually comics where you have science fiction, you have the fantasy content of superhero comic books, etc. Here the thrust is more towards realism. So you have many graphic novels, at least they're not restricted to fiction. Many graphic novels are autobiographical. They can be semi-autobiographical. Several of them claim to be documentaries. They can be history. Art Spiegelman's Moss, a very famous graphic novel, and that talks about his parents during the Holocaust. Then you have Persepolis, which I have presented here to you. Alison Bechdel's Fun Home. They're all personal memoirs. Then Spiegelman's story is about his parents. It is about the Holocaust. It is about himself also. Bechdel's account has a double protagonist because it is about the coming out as cure of both the daughter and the father. The hero, Persepolis, is the whole generation of Iranians, girls, boys, men, who are exposed to the theocratic violence of the Islamic revolution. Now, here you can You can see this. Look at this is Fun Home. Now, if you can see this, you can see how she's reading a book, but she's also feeling her genital area. Now, in this sense, it is more adult. Then you have some graphic novels which are almost journalistic, history writing. For instance, Art Spiegelman's In the Shadow of No Towers. When we talk about In the Shadow of No Towers, we can talk about the publication format. Graphic novels have a very strong preference for the book format. That is, it tends to avoid serialization. It can provide the format that resembles that of a traditional novel: size, cover, papers, number of pages. It is immediately recognized as something other than a comic. You have greater number of pages, for instance. They're not cheap. They're not cheap brochures. They're not. You don't have advertising in it. But of course, please remember there are exceptions. The original graphic novel, that is Will Eisner's A Contract with God, was a collection of short stories. But essentially, this is how a comic book is. This is how a graphic novel is published. If you have seen in the Shadow of No Towers, the book is actually very, very thick. It's almost like a cardboard. The pages are almost like cardboard, and it's huge. So the publication format of a graphic novel is also very, very different. Now, this is the essential difference between a comic book and a graphic novel. So when we write, don't mix up the two. Even though there are many critics who prefer the term comics to graphic novels, there are many people who say that there is a difference between comic books and graphic novels. This is essentially the difference between what a comic book is and what we would call a graphic novel. Now, we will come to some of the terminology of graphic novels. Now, the very first terminology that you must use is panel. That is the fundamental function of a comic. You have, when you communicate ideas, you have to encapsulate these ideas. You have to break it up into segments. These segments are called panels. They are also called frames. So you have the panel. It does not correspond exactly to a cinematic frame, but it's something like that. These are lines drawn around a scene. Inside that scene, you have some sort of an action or some segment of an action that is taking place, a rectangular or a square or a circular area of the comic book. Now, panels don't have to be the same size, but usually what happens is the comic artists tend to use a default panel size. They will vary it for different effects. The panel can be surrounded by a formal frame. It need not be surrounded by a formal frame. Frames can be imagistic. So when we read a comic book or a graphic novel, pay attention to the frames. Is it formally placed? Does the author vary? The graphic novelist, does he vary the size of the frames? What does the size of the frame tell you? Is it expressionistic? Is it a circle? Is it a starburst? It can be used in many ways. Is it wobbly? Is it a jagged line? These are things that we must pay attention to. Second, you have what is the hyperframe. The hyperframe is the total number of frames in the page. In one page, you have a number of frames that is called the hyperframe, a multi-frame made up of multiple panels. So this is the page, which is the hyperframe, wherein you have all these panels. These are two terms. Then you have what is called the strip or the tier. The strip or the tier, this is the strip or the tier. You have this. When you look at a comic book, the line, the horizontal line in which you have multiple panels placed, that is called the strip or the tier, a row of panels which form a single unit. Now, daily newspapers, you have strips. You have 3 or 4 panels together. Now, the single row of panels on a comic book or a graphic novel is called a strip or a tier. Tier is usually what is used when we talk about comics. Then, you have to understand, yes, where is it? Now, a strip or a tier which consists only of one panel. Again, the next tier consists of two panels. Similarly here, one tier, two panels, another tier, this is one panel. In this page, you have only two tiers. In this page, you have three. So this is how you distinguish between a strip and a tier. Now, another very important term which we use when we talk about graphic novels are gutters. Gutters is the space between panels. They are usually blank and they are the color of the printed page. Now, this is, can you see my cursor? Can you see my cursor? Sonia, am I audible?
Oh, yes, ma'am, you're perfectly audible.
Yes, and this is what you call the gutter. Now, the gutter is very important because Scott McCloud is one of the foremost theoreticians on cartoons. Now, he defines the gutter as a space between panels as an interspatial space where meaning is made between the contents of one panel to the next. It's something like Eisenstein spoke about montage. You have two images, and then the juxtaposition of those two images gives you a meaning. Now, he says this is an in limbo stage. So the human imagination is taking two separate images and it is transforming them into a single idea. For instance, in one image, you might have a Superman drawing his hand back. Or here, just look at this. Now you die. And he's saying, no, no. In the next, there's the sound, yeah. Now, what does that mean? That means that he has been killed. It's here. It's in this interspatial stage that this person has been killed. So here, every panel is a signifier. It is giving you a certain amount of information. That is reevaluated in the new panel. It is in the gutter where these discontinuous images become a continuous stream of signification. Why is this important? When we read a graphic novel, you must look at the spaces between the panels. That can also give you an idea about what the author meant. Is it too long? Is it too big? Is it very narrow? You can find that there's a lot of difference in the way an author presents the gutter. Now, some of the other terms I'm sure you know, balloons. Balloons, you have speech balloons. What are speech balloons? You have the oval where you have the words and the short tails pointing to the speaker. You have thought balloons like clouds, scalloped edges. Then you have small bubbles connecting it to the speaker's edge. Now, the variations in the appearance of the word balloon will show the artist's style is usage. Also, you have captions. Captions are spaces that are set aside for the text. I don't think I've put in those but let's go back here. These are the captions. Captions which are put in the spaces of the text where you can fill in the text, you can comment on what is happening, or you can just describe what is happening. It's usually placed horizontally across the top or the bottom of the panel, but you can insert it vertically. You can fill up the panel completely. It is supported. It supports the narration. It indicates the time and the place. It comments on what is happening in these images. Now, time. Time is also shown in the panels. So all these elements show the passage of time. So every panel, the number, the size of the panel, it contributes to the story rhythm, the passage of time. If you need to compress time, you have a greater number of panels that are shown. The action becomes segmented. So in larger conventional panels, what happens is you have that yeah, and then somebody, and I'm sorry, you say, now you die, and then yeah, somebody dies. Now in panels like this, what happens is everything is its action is almost this person is falling, then he seems to be running on the water. So what you have is, why is it that the author has presented it this way? It's almost a kind of a slow motion. The shape of the panel can be a factor. If you want to display a normal meter of action, there are perfect squares. If you want to show suspense, then you have different kinds of panels. Now, the most basic panel layout is one in which the shape and the proportion of the boxes remain rigid. This is the basic panel layout. The shape remains rigid. The proportion of the box remains rigid. The panel contains the reader's view, nothing more. This kind of panelization is usually seen in comic strips, comic books, because that is an extension of the newspapers in which they appear. But in graphic novels, it can be very, very different. Now, the frame's shape or the absence of the frame, that can have different kinds of meaning. It can become a part of the story itself. It can convey dimensions of sound. It can convey emotional states. It can contribute to the atmosphere of the page as a whole. Now, here, the reader becomes involved in the narrative. This is what graphic novelists sometimes do. Of course, you see this in comic books as well. Now, in the first picture, you have this jagged outline. There is an emotional explosion. There is a tension. This kind of, you have these jagged lines, usually associated with the radio, telephonic transmission of sound. Then, in the next one here, you have this long image. Yeah, the long panel, it reinforces this illusion of height. You have the square panels that are falling motion. Then in the third, you have power and threat. You have the actor who's bursting out of the confines of the panel. Now, this you will see in many, many comic books and graphic novels, where the person is bursting out of a panel. That shows a tremendous power. It shows authority. It shows threat. Then you have this kind of a cloud-like enclosure. This cloud-like enclosure shows that it is a dream. It can be a thought. It can be a memory. So there's no panel. There's no hard outline. Again, when there's no panel at all, there's no panel, elimination of a panel outline, then it shows the vastness, unlimited space. Any kind of book that you read, you must always speak about the shape and the treatment of frames, because that has a direct impact on the viewer's emotion. It makes an effort to generate the reader's own reaction to the action. It creates an emotional involvement in the narrative. This is about the panels. Now, we have what is called the splash page. Usually we see the splash page in the beginning of in every comic book or a graphic novel. You have, that's how it starts. That's a splash page, but you can also have it inside. And now usually it's a launching pad for the narrative. The full page is just one panel. It becomes one image. But when it comes inside, when it comes within the comic or in the graphic novel, that means that the author, the cartoonist or the graphic novelist gives that image a great deal of importance. So the question must always be why? What does it serve? Why is this image important? It's not simply a decorative unit. Then we have the points of perspective. Why perspective? The primary function of perspective, as in the case of film, you are orienting the reader. You're manipulating the reader's orient because the author has a plan. So you have this kind of perspective. In the first panel, it's eye level. You cover me from here while I blow the drum. You are an objective observer. Then you have the overhead view where you can see the setting. In the third, you are at the ground level so that you can almost feel the explosion. Then again, in the fourth, it's almost a worm's eye view. There again, you become involved in the action. Overhead views, when you have an overhead view, it's a God's eye view. So it does not evoke a sense of fear. Whereas when you're viewing something from below, it's supposed to stimulate the sensation of fear. Similarly, if you have the figure, when you look at Amritsar comics, for instance, when you look at these comics, you'll find that heroic figures, they're all presented from below, just like in a cinema. A narrow panel will make you feel hemmed in. Wide panel will make you feel as if you've got plenty of space. So the shape of the panel and the user perspective is used to manipulate the emotional states of a reader. When we read a graphic novel, always see how the image is presented. Also, you have this, look at these two images. In the first image, this is panel A, this is panel B. In one, the reader is outside looking in. On the other, the reader is almost looking from the top. So in the first, example, you have the worm's eye view from below. Then here this monster seems large. It's kind of, there's almost a threat. You can feel dominated by the monster. The second is the same scene, but it is a bird's eye. You're looking from above. Wide panel. There is a detachment. So there is very little threat and there is very little involvement. Then you can see how the body is positioned. How is it that the cartoonist or the graphic novelist presents the body? These can evoke the readers. It can evoke nuances of expression. It can give you the auditory inflection of the speaker. The way this person in the fourth panel says, "I'm sorry," kneeling down and holding his hands together, will be very different from the way the man in the fifth panel says, "I'm sorry." So all these things, when we read the novel, pay attention to all that. Also to posture. Posture. You are selecting one particular moment out of a sequence of related moments. So one posture has been selected. What does that posture show? That is frozen into a panel in a block of time, in a short period of time. This held a moment. What does it possibly mean? Another factor that we must look at is facial expression. In all these, it's the same facial expression, but you have a different you have the different verbals that are associated with it. So facial expression can register emotion. This kind of emotion, what is it that the reader is trying to, or what is it that the author is trying to convey? The gestures, unlike the body, the gestures in the face, it can be more easily understood. So when we read a novel, again, this is particularly true of graphic novels, not so much about comics. Essentially, when we read a graphic novel, we must pay a lot of attention to how the facial expression has been presented. Then, the use of light. The employment of light has an emotional effect. Shadows evoke fear. Light implies safety. Now, you have this well-lit room. You have the darker room. Then you have the same figure which is not so well lit, and the one that is well lit, there one shows the idea of threat. Then another thing that we need to look at is focalization. Focalization means where is the main person placed. Every panel should be seen as a stage where there are arrangements of elements. They have to be arranged with a clear purpose. Nothing is accidental. Nothing is placed casually. So the primary consideration is what is the center of attention? The mission is always to focus on the center of attention, the focal point where the reader's eye engages. Every panel has its own focal point. So when you have something that is dominant, then you must understand that that has been placed there for a particular reason. So which is the focal point in a particular panel? Remember, when we take a comic book or a graphic novel, we can never analyze the whole thing. Because it's far too vast. One panel will give you so much of information. So you have to pick and choose particular panels for us to analyze. Sometimes in a paper, you can analyze a maximum of 5 panels. You can't analyze more than that if you really want to analyze the panel properly. If you want to, so therefore you will have to pick out the most significant panels, and then you can of course mention the others. Now, remember that in a graphic novel, you do not have illustrations. There is a difference between an illustration and a visual. In graphic novels, what we have are visuals. In comics, usually particularly in many of our comics, they are illustrations. A visual replaces the text. Whereas an illustration simply repeats it, it amplifies it, it decorates it. So your graphic novelist is a visualist, he is not an illustrator. Now look at this. This is from Amar Chitragatha. Lakshmana stepped forward, we can see that, and garlanded him. It's there. So what is happening? That this is only an illustration, whereas this is a visual. We must ask what price we pay when we wake up. Here she's only just walking. So all these are illustrations. Now, these are some of the basic aspects. If images are reduced to illustrations, what happens is you are simply giving you are simply giving information that has already been provided, by the text. In the case of a graphic novel, what happens is you give in information that the visuals give information that the text does not offer, because sometimes there's no text, or the text can be an ironic counterpoint to what is being shown in the illustration. So the image will have to be completed by the use of the word. The meaning of the text has to be anchored or has to be relayed by the images. So you always have to look at the nuances within a graphic novel. Again, another thing that you can look at is the lettering. The lettering, how are the letters? How have the letters appeared within the graphic novel? Now, the text and words in a graphic novel are drawn. They appear in a specific place, in a page, in a speech balloon, in caption, so on, but they are not meant to be just read. They have to be looked at in a graphic novel, because they occupy a particular space for a particular reason. They might also be written differently. You have the graphic substance of the letter, something which known as a literariness. Now, this is the kind of grammar textuality. This is a term, grammar textuality, which was a concept coined by a French theoretician. That is, they have to have the aspects of written or printed text which are autonomous. So the text in which this autonomy is present is very, very obvious. Now, when you're the form of lettering, the configuration of the words in the speech balloon, the insertion of the balloon into the panel, the presence of the letters, the symbols that are there, the presence of a typical kind of onomatopoeia, the visual dialogue between the words and the images on the page, all these elements underscore the importance of the visual form of the words. So it's not simply a translation of what is being given there in the image. The words themselves have to be looked at, and that is what is known as grammar textuality. There a language in the written form where you are talking about speech. How has it been presented in a graphic novel? Now, all these are the aspects that we must look at initially before we start any kind of comic book or a graphic novel. Now, some of the major theoreticians, one person that you can look at is Scott McCloud. He is a theoretician of comic books. Another is Groenstein, 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 his system of comics. Now, these two, at least these are the theoreticians that you can look at. Another theoretician that you can look at is Benoit Peter, Benoit Peter. These are some of the theoreticians that we can look at. Thierry Groenstein. Charles Hatfield, again, is another theoretician who you can read upon. So, Thierry, Thierry Groenstein, Groenstein, Benoit Peter, Benoit Peter, I think, Peter, and Scott McCloud. So read up a little more of their works of these theoreticians before you start analyzing your comic books or your graphic novels. So with that, I think I will stop. And then, if there's any sort of discussion, I will do my best to answer you.
Thank you, Preeti ma'am. Yeah, that was a wonderful lecture. Actually, I was just thinking about how thorough and how methodically it was done. So I was wondering if any of the audience has any question, they can raise it. Otherwise, I'll start off with just one, which is in your reading of all of these graphic novels, which was the one that struck you the most and why?
The one that struck me is definitely Art Spiegelman's In the Shadow of No Towers, because he brings in all kinds of popular culture, from the very beginning, till I think till the late 1900s. He brings in all kinds of popular culture, and then he links it to in a particular social issue, political issue, that is the fall of the destruction of the World Trade Center. So when you read that novel, you're not only looking at the formal aspects. You have to look at, there are resonances. It's almost like reading The Wasteland. There are resonances of what has been of what it was earlier, and then what America has become today, America's position in the world. So you have to bring in all the elements, the content of what these cartoons meant in the earlier years, that is in the early 1900s, from then onwards, the meanings that it had then, the differences in America today, that is, as far as content is concerned. Then you also had to look at the materiality of the text itself, the formal aspects of the text itself. So you could hardly analyze one page before the frame of one page before you finished your paper completely. So then Grunstein speaks about something called braiding. Yeah, that's one of the terms that he uses, where you have one image that can be repeated successively, or a character that can be repeated, and the change that comes about when you read all these images together, that's called braiding. So what I did was I picked up a couple of characters and then saw how it changed across the graphic novel and what it implied. So in that sense, I think that was one of the most interesting graphic novels that I've read.
So thank you, Preeti ma'am. By the look of it, everybody seems to have totally grasped your lecture. So for everyone who's listening, I think this is the best time to give an introduction to the speaker. Dr. Preeti Srinivas is the head of the Department of English at St. Teresa's College, Ernakulam. And for those who are listening in from All Saints, she's also one of the teachers of Dr. Kuku Xavier of the Faculty of the Department of English. But apart from all of that, she's a wonderful friend, an excellent scholar. Her research thesis was on Mahatma Gandhi and masculinity. And in the coming years, I'm sure that we are going to be hearing more about that from Dr. Kumar. And I think that this talk that you have given us today will pave the way for a number of interesting thoughts in terms of being developed into research papers or projects of our students. And thank you very, very much for that. And we look forward to more of these collaborative initiatives as part of our faculty exchange program.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you very much. You'll be online, right?
Yes.